بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا زدنا علما وتقوى واغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكن معنا ولا تكون علينا، اهدنا إلى طريقة الحق وثبت أقدامنا، ونصلي ونسلم على الذي أرسلته بالهدى والدين الحق ليعلم الناس طريقة الرشد، وبسنته تقوم القسط. فهذا هو السبب نحن نريد أن نقوم بأخلاق النبي، لأنه النموذج عنده نموذج للعالمين، فهو ما فرق بين الناس بالباطل، ولكن وضع ميزانا، وهذا الميزان هو التقوى بين المؤمنين. التقوى، عن طريق التقوى نستطيع أن نميز بين الناس، لكن التميز في المجتمع هذه يفرق بين الناس على حسب لونهم، على حسب تقسيم باطل لا تجد في الكتاب ولا في السنة حجة لهذا التقسيم. فالتقسيم عند الله تبارك وتعالى هو أن يقسم الناس إلى الشعوب والقبائل لتعرفوا بعضهم ببعض. فلا نستطيع أن نتكلم في قضية العنصرية والتميز لو لا نتكلم في التعريفات الموجودة في هذه المجتمع، قضية race وقضية white privilege وقضية white supremacy. لا نجد هذه الأشياء في المجتمع، هذه الأشياء موجودة في المجتمع وموجودة في النظام، فلازم أن نفرق بين فهم الواقع وفهم الكتاب. هذا هو المطلوب الأول علينا، أن نفرق بين ما يجري في المجتمع ولا نختلط الأمور، ولا نستطيع أن ننكر أن في هذه المجتمع في هذه المشكلة من بداية إقامة المجتمع، مشكلة العنصرية ومشكلة الظلم. فحينما تقول لي أنت تريد أن تتكلم في هذه القضية أين الحجة في الكتاب والسنة؟ يعني الله تبارك وتعالى قال لقد كرمنا بني آدم، هذا هو الحجة الأول، كلنا أبناء آدم. لكن في ثقافتكم أنتم فرقوا بين الناس على تقسيمات باطل لا نجد لها حجة في الكتاب ولا في السنة. فكيف نتكلم أصلا؟ لازم أن نتصور الأمور كما هي، نفهم الواقع، فقه الواقع وفهم الواقع. ولو تريد قواعد على هذا وتثبيت على هذا، تجد أن شيخ الألباني حتى قال على أي طالب علم الذي يريد أن يفتي في الأمور، أن يتكلم في الأمور، أن يفهم الواقع. فبيننا أن نفهم الواقع. كما قلنا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وضع ميزانا، وما فرق بين الناس إلا عن طريق التقوى، وهذا هو الإسلام. نحن أبناء آدم، لكن في الثقافة وفي المجتمع في فهم آخر في تقسيمات الناس. فكيف نتكلم عن قضية العنصرية وأنت تريد أن تتكلم عن قضية العنصرية عن طريق الكتاب والسنة، وتنكر أن هذه مشكلة موجودة في المجتمع؟ أخي، هذه مصيبة، هذه مصيبة كبرى. يعني لو تريد أن تتكلم معي في هذه القضية، عليك أن تدرس الأمر، تدرس القانون والتاريخ، وتدرس علم الاجتماع، وتدرس الأخلاق والفلسفة، لأن هذه الأشياء كلها يعني هذه العلوم كلها هي التي بنى التصور عليها. هذه العلوم هي العلوم التي الفلاسفة من هذه المجتمع استخدمها لتكون فهم جديد ومصطلحات جديدة، ومن ضمن هذه المصطلحات فكرة الريس. يعني فكرة race, where did it come from? So we'll bring it back, akhi. Don't be offended. If you're offended by this issue, there's a problem, because you didn't bring the reality of the situation as I said it. There's a difference between establishing yourself as white and calling yourself European American. Go back to your roots. If you're going to call yourself white, then you support a system of white nationalism. This society has been constructed on that premise. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights has been constructed on that premise. Who's a human being incomplete and who's not a human being incomplete? The legal system is predicated upon a construct of race. Even when you go to take a car loan, when you go to take a school loan, it is predicated upon what is your social category and your social standing. The color coding of people, where's the basis of that in the Quran and the Sunnah? Where's the basis of that in the Quran and the Sunnah? These are ideas that bring out concepts of Jahiliyyah. Even Imam Ibn Khaldun, in bringing this type of concept, fell into a problem. It deviates from the book and the Sunnah. Even those who accepted the narrations from Ibn Munabbih that claim that the blacks are from the children of Ham and that they have the curse of Ham, riwayat that are not even established. So if we want to understand this point, we have to understand, first of all, what is it that we believe about human beings in the Quran and the Sunnah? That's the first thing. The other thing that we have to understand, which is parallel to that, is what goes on in the society. You can't, you want to talk about white privilege? White privilege is being able to be stopped by the police and walk away without being shot. If you want to talk about white privilege is that the majority of your people are not incarcerated. If you want to talk about white privilege, your people are not in cages at the border. Right? Your people are not dehumanized under those conditions. If you want to talk about white privilege, is a president which throws paper towels at a people that's going through a Category 5 hurricane to humiliate them. Is the recent taking away of $400 million from a package that was supposed to go to the Puerto Rican people. If you want to talk about white privilege, is the ability to live in a society in which you feel that you're a first-class citizen. That's the reality of the situation. Don't tell me that this is not a reality. Your people haven't gone through the whole issue of colonization. The European American community that comes into Islam, you have to make a decision. You may not like the tone, but you have to make a decision, because now you're dealing with your Muslim brothers that experience oppression in the system. You have to choose whether you want to accept the program of Islam, go back to your roots of being European American, or you want to continue on the program of white nationalism. It's not my issue that you are not at a point where you understand how the system operates with this. And it's not a belittlement of you, brother. That's the reality of the situation. But if you don't put the time into study and come into an understanding of identity and come into an understanding of history. So when you bring anecdotal evidences how white privilege affect me, this I gave you instances that are very real. Issues of law, issues of economy, issues of treatment. Those are some basic realities. You have no proof to go to the contrary against that. There's no concept of a liberal agenda here or leftist agenda. Leave the LGBT issue out of this. Let's not confuse conversations here, because that was a series of conversations. You want to address the issue of white supremacy and white privilege? Let's deal with it. Let's deal with the issue of white supremacy and white privilege. Is there such a thing as multiple races in the deen of Islam? And then if there is such a thing as multiple races, does one race get to pronounce itself as superior to the other? Right? If you agree to that point, do you acknowledge that there is a system of categorization of people in this country, which is a manifestation of a Nazi type of mentality, is not no different than what was in the apartheid, right? Are you going to deny that these are issues in the society? Are you going to deny that that there's an overwhelming number of blacks that are suffering police brutality? Are you going to deny the treatment of Latinos right now, on the border or outside of the border? Are you the one that's being picked up by ICE? Are you going to deny the conditions of the indigenous Native Americans that are on plantations? Are you going to deny those realities? So that becomes the issue. The issue becomes, how is it that you're understanding what's taking place in the society? This is nothing personal at all, right? This is nothing personal at all. This has to do with coming to a real understanding and dismantling a colonial mentality, which has no place in Islam. It has no place in Islam. Islam here, how Islam manifested here, was on this very question, the brotherhood of Islam. How Islam manifested here in these lands, right? Because, by the way, I should remind you, Islam came from our people. Islam came from our communities, right? The European Americans that have come in recent times are coming late to the scene. So you have work to do on yourself. You may not like it, but it's my position to tell you. You have work to do on yourself, on your identity, and come to an understanding of who you are. But when you come and you try to support a white system, a white concept, and you say, I'm white, I take offense to this or that. Are you white? Is it true that, there's a unified front amongst European Americans? So your whiteness negates being Irish and being Polish and being German and all of that? Or is the concept of whiteness a social construct? So how is it that you're going to ask for evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah on this type of issue? Yes, you have an obligation. You have an obligation to stand up for what's right. You have an obligation to speak the truth on the situation, right? This takes priority. The existence of people being wiped out takes priority, right? Addressing that issue takes priority. The regard for human life takes priority, right? That's the situation that we're dealing with right now. And so when we look, we ask for proofs and stuff like that. But I suppose that the last sermon of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is no proof then as a standard for how we as Muslims should operate. As we as Muslims, right? That we should operate from a standard that, there is no difference between this group and that group. That's in the context of Islam. So, but what about in the context of a system that discriminates between people? Do we just leave it like that, like it's no problem at all? That's the issue that's the issue that we have to confront. So when people take offense to this, it's because they have enmeshed themselves in whiteness so much that they can't conceive of their ancestors' history and where they come from. And if your ancestors participated in building this system, right, and participating in the elimination of millions of people off of this continent, like Trump said, our ancestors came here and they tamed the whole continent. That's the legacy that you want to be a part of? That's not my problem if you want to be a part of that legacy. See, it's not my problem that you take offense to that. Because what's my priority here is the preservation of life, the preservation of the dignity of people that are being oppressed in the land. Because somebody's feelings get hurt about what they feel about the situation. What are you doing with police brutality, brother? What does the Quran and the Sunnah obligate you to in that regard? With regard to justice of human beings. What are you doing with issues on the border, brother? Right? That's the issue. We'll take care of our people. We don't have a problem with that. And we'll stand up for whoever else is suffering injustice. But the feelings and the emotions that come along with when you're called out on the issue that you have a responsibility, right, to address the injustices in the land, that, if you have feelings for that, if you caught feelings, that's not my problem. It really isn't. You and whatever other brother catches feelings with that. And it's no disrespect. It's just that you have to have a certain type of orientation to understand where this stuff is coming from. If you haven't put in the work to be able to understand how race is constructed and how it impacts law and how it impacts policy and how it impacts economy and how it impacts education and how it impacts people's standings. If you haven't put in the time to deal with that, then you need to slow down and deal with and say, well, let me understand, right? I don't, tell me what, did your people go to the Tuskegee Institute? Has your community been sterilized? Right? Was your community, was it taken off of its land? Right? These are real issues. These are not issues that are just made up and anecdotal in the service of a particular emotional agenda. This becomes the fallacy of logic, right? There's a certain thing that has to be understood. Where is your heart to the suffering of people? That's the bottom line. If there's no heart to be able to engage in empathy and compassion with others, right? To be able to understand their position and their suffering in the society, right? That becomes the issue. Sure, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to be against that type of thinking and that type of approach in the system, right? Just like if we're in a Nazi society which is pretty much where the direction is in, that we all have a responsibility to speak against that. You want to talk to me about the issue of somebody's private sex life? Talk to me about what's taking place in the streets right now, right? Talk to me about that situation, right? Talk to me about what people, are suffering at the moment, right? And like we said, how if we want to talk about the Quran and the Sunnah, where's the whole concept of laqad karramna bani Adam, right? When you see that being violated, where's the position in that regard, right? This is the biggest issue that we have in the community. This is the biggest problem that we have, is that we think that when we come into Islam, that there's this identity that people have to wipe out. We're all Muslim brothers. But then you get offended, right, if somebody calls out the issue of whiteness and you automatically stand for whiteness, right? But then everybody else, when they stand for themselves and their community on justice, it's not from the angle of asabiyya, and it's not from the angle of qawmiyya, it's from the angle of justice, right? When people stand for their people in that regard, for their cousins, for their aunts, for their brothers, for their sisters, for their children, right? When they stand for their community being discriminated against, then we hear, there's no racism. Brother, you don't understand racism. That's the problem. That's the problem with some of the European American brothers. You have not come to terms with what racism means. You haven't come to terms with what is prejudice, what is discrimination. You don't understand the concept of white supremacy and how it manifests itself. You don't understand the concept of Eurocentricity, how it manifests itself. And if you want to learn, we could teach you. The black and the Latino community can teach you, brothers. But you brothers have to be willing to learn, right? You're coming into a reality. You're coming into a deen in which people have sacrificed from their blood and their effort, right? And part of our legacy here, when we start talking about Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, is addressing and combating this problem. So just because people went to study in Medina or whatever, that doesn't negate the job that still has to be done, right? That's the part of the problem that we have before us, right? The problem of negating the reality as it is what, when you look at the Hukum Shari'i, is it just saying that all human beings are obligated to practice the deen? Or is there some conditions for the people that are practicing the deen? Is it a person that's a mature person? Balik? Is it a person that's sane? Is it a person that's Muslim? Is it a person that's capable? In other words, the shurut al-taklif. There's conditions of obligation. Okay, if you're talking about shurut al-taklif, where does that human being exist? Does that human being exist in Mars or on the ocean? If that human being exists in Mars or on the ocean, how is it that they're going to understand what direction of the Qibla, what's the direction of the Qibla, or what time of the day is? That human being exists in this condition that we're talking about on the earth. And because that human being exists on the earth, there's conditions which impact that human being on the earth. That human being exists in a nation state on the earth. And that nation state, which is based on race, is a construct which is based on race, a political system which is based on the idea of nation, which is rooted in race, right? That political system has a number of different systems that operate. And those different systems operate under certain premises, which take into consideration this idea of race. So the sociology of this is where you brothers are missing. You brothers are taking offense when I clearly said, right? There's a difference between those who have orientation of being, and I said myself, I don't like using the term white because I don't subscribe to that system, right? And if you notice, I say European American. But when people want to commit themselves to the problems of the system when it comes to race, then they align themselves with the color scheme. I'm not going to speak for the African American community, because the African American community has taken the concept of black and has flipped it around and turned it into a black power initiative. Why? Because European Americans decided to dehumanize blacks, right? And decided to marginalize them from the system on a number of different occasions, systematically throughout history, right? So blacks had to construct their own identity to oppose that, right? To oppose that issue. So we're not going to get to any sort of understanding and any sort of concept, right? If you don't understand what is the issue of society, right? If you don't understand how it is that things manifest themselves in society, you're confusing the issue. Saying Quran and Sunnah like we exist outside of society. What is the application of the Quran, right, to the society? Don't we have an obligation, like you said, enjoy the good and forbid the evil, to be just, right? So then in this situation, are you willing to say that Islam supports a system of oppression? Right? That's what you're trying to tell me? You're telling me that Islam supports white nationalism, right? Which marginalizes other people? Right? So if you took on a nationalist identity, which is problematic, it's not a nationalism of an economic development program for the betterment of society without harming other people. It's a nationalism which has marginalized whole groups of people. Right? And so that's the situation. No, I mean, this is not a beef. This is not a beef. There's no beef here. Right? There's no beef here. Nobody's going to come in from any community and redefine the struggle. They have to understand what the struggle is, right? This is one of the biggest problems that we have. If you don't understand what the struggle is, then you need to understand what the struggle is, right? That's part of white privilege, that you can live without even understanding that there's a struggle, right? That you can exist with the legal system backing you up. You can exist with the majority of your history as it is painted being taught. You can exist with the television, manifesting their ideas of beauty which are suitable to you. That's part of living in white privilege. That's another manifestation of that. And so that becomes the issue here, right? يعني لو تريد أن تحكم على الشيء يعني لازم أن تتصور الأمر كما هو. If you want to come to a judgment on the issue, you need to conceptualize the issue as it is. These are rules of understanding, right? So before you come and say Quran and Sunnah, I just gave you one little concept. Where is لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ at? Right? Where's that at? Are we the ones that are living with dignity and honor? Really? From what I just saw recently, you had some Latina sisters that they were sent over the border while they were about to deliver, right? If I just looked at recently, there was a whole bunch of women, Latina women, that they were on their menses and they were being cared for. Last time I checked, the children that were taken, right? They were taken away from their parents, and their parents had to pay a DNA test to get them back from the system. So there's real issues here. And if you're going to tell me, well, they should not have come into the country, well, you should not have come into the country. Your people should not have come into the country. This is indigenous lands. You're on indigenous lands. This is a colonial project, right? So there's some things that have to be understood properly, right? If we ever want to get to this issue. Between you and me, Akhi, and I call you Akhi, it's Islam. We're supposed to be able to deal with each other on the Quran and the Sunnah and understand that there's issues. Between us, we need an Abu Dhar and a Bilal moment. Right? With the European American community, they need to come to terms. They need to take the role of Abu Dhar, right? In this reality. When Abu Dhar offended Bilal, radiallahu anhu, based on his origin, right? And said something to him that was humiliating, right? Bilal took his issue to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to get restorative justice. The Prophet Muhammad didn't sit here and say, well, it's in your imagination. We're all brothers. And there's some mention that it's Jahiliyyah. And so the situation, what was it? That Abu Dhar corrected himself and understood that that orientation that he had was problematic. And he put himself in a situation where Bilal could have had restorative justice. Right? Up to now, this country has apologized for the Japanese concentration camps. Up to now, there's no formal apology to African Americans. By the way, many of them that were Muslim, right, that were subjugated to a process of humiliation and dehumanization, which exists until today. It exists until right now. There's no, so when you brothers say, well, where does the Quran hold us accountable? Where the Quran is saying that the Quran is holding you accountable from the angle of if there's wrongs that have been done, if you benefit from that, then you need to correct it, right? That's the situation that we have before us. This is not a game that we're playing of this proof and that proof. The issue is that how are you going to deal with systemic injustice? Systemic injustice, the way that it exists now, is not the same way that it existed in the time of Quraysh. So that's the issue that requires understanding of how to deal with the system. And by the way, Malcolm X had all of this stuff on the table as it is anyway. This is nothing new in the discourse of the Muslims in the United States. It just happens to be that we live under a system right now that has accentuated the problem of white supremacy, right? That's the issue. But the white supremacy existed from before, right? And what is white supremacy? It's the discrimination against groups of people by one group of people claiming superiority, right? Claiming some sense of superiority over them and inferiority over others. And that's not something that's made up. The issue of inferiority, look at the bell curve. Look at the bell curve. Look at the bell curve psychological study and what they tried to say, with regard to intelligence, right? Look at special education and the over classification. And sure, we understand that there are European Americans which have been impacted by the system, and that's true, and they should be on the side of justice. They shouldn't try to align themselves with the same, systematic effort of oppression and say that we're white. If you fell on the poor side of things, then the system itself has an issue with you, because the reality of the system is that the ideology is being guided by a minority of people. But as long as people benefit, then they're okay with it, right? And that's the problem that we have. There's a lot of stuff to be said on this. There's a lot to be communicated on this point. There's studies to be dealt with on this issue, right? On a number of different levels. But like I said, if you brothers don't want to put in the time, it doesn't matter what Yusuf Rios says, right? And that's the issue. Some of the brothers are telling me, that the time is enough that has been given on this. I say to myself, define yourself according to the origin of your people, so we can be at a better system of national reconciliation. And there's no space with you brothers want to talk about the Nation of Islam and how it discriminates, but you don't want to address the point and the problem that the Nation of Islam was trying to address, right? And that's the oppression of people, right? You want to say racism, this, racism, that, but at the end of the day, I don't see that brothers want to deal with the issues. And there's some brothers that do, right? There's some brothers that already have come to terms with this, right? European American brothers, that they understand the problem, right? And again, it's nothing personal, right? I'm addressing the system. I understand that there's people that are victims to the system, right? And that's where we're going to leave it at. If people are not ready to do the work and understand how race is constructed, understand Eurocentrism, understand the construction of a lot of these ideas coming out of the Enlightenment period, even understand racism before that, but that's not the issue at hand. But if you don't want to do the work to understand from 1492 how empires were constructed on this idea that justified the stealing from people and the subjugation of people, then there's no conversation, because this conversation requires work, right? It requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of investment. It requires a lot of understanding of history, of philosophy, of sociology, of political science. It requires a number of different of studies. And this is the biggest issue that nobody wants to put in the time. You can't understand this society, and I'm going to shut it down with this, if you don't understand the construction of race. You'll never understand this society if you don't understand how it is based on race, right? And we end with that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.